Reducing a fraction to lowest terms means reducing it to its smallest equivalent fraction so that it'll be easier to understand. So for example, it's a lot easier to understand what 1/2 means than 39/78. But the fractions are equivalent, so they actually mean the same thing. And there are two approaches to reducing fractions, and you'll probably use both methods. One involves divisibility rules, and the other involves finding the greatest common factor. So with the divisibility rules approach, this is kind of the easiest method, but it's also the longest. What we're going to do is we're just going to use the divisibility rules to keep reducing the fraction until it won't reduce anymore. So for example, here we have 48/80ths, and just looking at them and using the divisibility rules, I can see that they're both even numbers, so they will both divide by 2. So let's divide 48 by 2 is going to give us 24, and 80 divided by 2 will work out to be 40. So we've reduced 48/80ths to 24 over 40, but we're not done, because when we look at this we can see, okay, 24 and 40 are both even numbers, which means they will both divide by 2, so they'll both reduce more. But in fact, because I know the times table, I know that both 24 and 40 divide by 4, so I'm just going to use that instead. So 24 divided by 4 is going to be 6, and 40 divided by 4 is going to be 10. So now we've reduced 48/80ths to 6/10. But hang on a minute here, these are both even numbers, and so I know they will both divide by at least 2. So in fact I'm going to try 2, and it'll reduce even more. So 6 divided by 2 is going to give me 3, and 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So now I've reduced 48/80ths to 3/5. Now I'm going to look at these two numbers and use the divisibility rules. Well, they're not even numbers, so they don't divide by 2. 5 doesn't divide by 3. 3 doesn't divide by 5. This is as small as it will go, so this is lowest terms. 48/80ths reduces to 3/5. So in some ways the greatest common factor approach is more complicated, but in some ways it's easier. And what we're going to do is we're going to factor both the numerator, 48, and the denominator, 80. And we're going to find the biggest number that is a factor of both. So I'm going to start with 80. And that's easy to factor because it's an even number, so I know that it divides evenly by 2. So we've got 2 times 40. Now let's see if it'll factor even more. Well, 2 is as small as it'll get, but 40 will factor more, and 40 I know could be 4 times 10. So those are more factors, 2 and 4 and 10, and since we're looking for all the factors, 2 times 4 is 8, so that's another factor. Now let's see if this will factor even more. So 2 doesn't get any smaller, but 4 does. It could be 2 times 2. And 10 does. It could be 2 times 5. Alright, so I've got 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which if I multiply that out, I'm going to find that's 16. So 16 and 5 and 4 and 10 and 2 and 40, and actually if I were to think about it a little bit more, 20 are all factors of 80. Okay, so now let's find the factors of 48. So 48 is also an even number, so I'm going to start with 2 times 24, and see if that factors more. Now 2 doesn't get any smaller, but 24 does. 24 could be 2 times 12. And I know that 2 times 2 is 4. So there's another factor. And let's see if it'll factor even more. So I've got 2 times 2. Those don't go any smaller. But 12 does. 12 could be 2 times 6. Okay, and I've got 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So that's another factor. Now let's see if these will factor more. So I've got 2 times 2 times 2. Those don't get any smaller. But 6 does. It could be 2 times 3. Okay, so I've got 3, and then all these 2's, and 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. If I multiply those out, I'll find they give me 16, and so that's another factor, 16 times 3. Okay, so if I look at both of these factorings, I can see that 2 is a common factor, 4 is a common factor in both 48 and 80, 6 is not, 10 is not, but 8 is a common factor in both 48 and 80, and the biggest one is 16. That is a factor of both 48 and 80. So that's the greatest common factor. That's the biggest number that divides evenly into both. So now we're going to divide by the greatest common factor. So we divide both by 16. If we use our long division, we'll find that 48 divided by 16 is 3, and 80 divided by 16 is 5. So 48 eightieths reduces to 3/5, and that is lowest terms.